Today, I've got Brian Foster joining me all the way from beautiful South Africa. Brian has been a managing director of a financial services firm in the UK, which is where he's from. He also founded his own wealth and advisory firm. And 7 years ago, he immigrated to South Africa. Now, in that time, South Africa's gone through, much like Australia and anywhere else in the world, a whole lot of change with regards to the environment, ecosystem, industry, and regulation around financial advice. But he decided that, much like myself, he was passionate about moving the advice professions forward. And as it says on his LinkedIn profile, I'm just going to bring it up. I quite like the line underneath his name, which is transforming the financial advice conversation. So very much about helping advisors evolve what value they provide to the clients, how they have the conversation with them, how they charge for it, and moving it out of this narrow band of product and investment and insurance advice as far as the ecosystem goes. So Brian, thanks very much for joining us today. It's
Hi, Baz.
Awesome having you here.
Thanks. And good to be here.
And before we move on, if anyone wants to find Brian, you can look him up on LinkedIn and feel free to shoot him an invite to connect. I'd probably suggest customize your message and just mention that you're actually watching the show, because that's always a nice thing to do when you're inviting someone to connect on LinkedIn. And you can also check out one of the businesses that he's founded, which is beyondrdr.com. So that's pretty simple, beyondrdr.com. And we might just jump in and talk a little bit about what's happening in South Africa for the Australian advisors and accountants, etc., that will be watching this. And we might also do the same thing and reverse it around for those of the people that you might share this with as well, talking about what's happened in Australia. So, mate, what is RDR? What's that mean?
RDR is the Retail Distribution Review. So it's a review of the way that financial services products are distributed to the public. The terminology actually came from the UK originally. So back in the UK, sort of around 2007, 2008, we had the regulator talking about this expression RDR. They went through the whole process of reviewing the way that products were distributed, and they came up with some new regulations which came in at the end of 2012. The sort of headline, I suppose, for that is the banning of commission on investment products and the shift from commission to fees. I suppose that's the headline. There was also some qualification stuff in there. And South Africa has kind of embraced the terminology. Some would say they've copied the terminology from the UK, but the landscape here is a little bit different. So South Africa is now going through the same process. I think in Australia you've had a bunch of things, but it's FOFA. So your South African audience, your Australian audience would understand that. It's kind of a similar sort of thing. So it's the review of
between what's happened in the UK and what's happening in South Africa.
I think the problem is fundamentally the same. The key differences probably are in the landscape itself in terms of the demographic. I mean, South Africa is an emerging economy. The UK is very much a developed economy. So I think the South Africans are feeling like, we're not ready. Clients aren't ready. Advisors certainly aren't ready. So the landscape is a little bit different, and the way that it's being introduced is different. So in the UK, it kind of all came in on one day. One day we didn't have RDR, the next all these rules apply. In South Africa, that's happening over a 3-phased process. So we've just had phase 1 last year. We've got phase 2 coming in probably towards the tail end of this year. And then phase 3, which is the banning of commission, will probably be sometime in 2020.
Okay, so there's a transitional period of time. Now, if we come to the UK, so I know we're talking South Africa, but you obviously have history through both of those.
Yeah.
So in the UK, they banned commissions, and that was a hard date, right? So it was pretty much from
Yeah.
this point going forward, this isn't happening. So what would be kind of your observations as some of the key takeaways from that happening? How did firms like deal with that? And the reason I'm asking the question is because Australia still isn't quite sure what it's doing with some of the commissions.
Yeah.
And so, we were about to potentially, depending if a different party got in at the election, most advisors with their commissions were faced with a much harder date as opposed to there being a transition time. So how did firms cope with that? How did it change the ecosystem in the UK?
Yeah, so it was mixed, I think. I mean, in my case, I'd been in financial services for many, many years, and I was already charging fees. I mean, in fact, if I go back to 1997, that was the last time I saw a commission payment. Right? So, I mean, I can't remember what indemnity commission is like these days. So for firms like mine, it didn't really have an impact. We were already charging fees for the work that we were doing, and we were doing proper financial planning work. So RDR was a bit of a non-event for us. Lots of other firms that were still operating on commission found it much, much more difficult. So in the UK, there was a massive training and development focus, I think, initially. The regulator sort of set the bar a little bit higher in terms of the qualifications, so there was a lot of that to be done. But in terms of commissions, I think it was quite mixed. Lots of people really struggled to make the transition initially. I mean, if you look at the numbers, there was a big decrease in the numbers of advisors. So I think the numbers were something like 40,000 advisors just before RDR, and then it went down to the numbers were like 25,000. And I think it sort of crept back up a little bit. But interestingly, it was the banks that effectively decided that their financial planning arms were going to be shut. And Barclays made 1,000 people redundant overnight, swiftly followed by HSBC back in 2011. So those guys really, really struggled. And I think a lot of those advisors have come back in to IFA firms and set up their own businesses in some cases. And they've embraced a completely different way of doing business. So I think initially it was quite tough for people. But what's interesting is now those people that have survived are generally getting paid more. They're more profitable. They're doing better work. They're more professional. Clients are getting a better quality service. So, all in all, it was a sort of tough journey. But I think those people that are left are actually having a much better time of it now.
Yeah, I think that's some interesting lessons and kind of at the core of what I wanted to find out from you as well. Because if we look in Australia, so yes, we went through, it's called FOFA, or Future of Financial Advice. And there was a whole bunch of things in there. So there was no hard line drawn in the sand for banning commissions, so to speak. Clients have to opt into their arrangements. And so that brought in some changes. And it's been a gradual process. And we've just had a Royal Commission in Australia, which has really kind of turned the heat up, so to speak, on the process. And so we have this thing called grandfathered commissions. So basically the way it works is, if you had existing clients paying commissions on certain, scenarios and products, they were grandfathered under some of the changes. So that meant they could continue as an ongoing basis. Whereas, depending on the scenario, and yes, it is actually a bit of if this, then that, then, new clients are being operated in a different way. So that's kind of how it's come about here. And what we've seen is that there are lots and lots of businesses out there, which in my opinion are, they're kind of borderline viable, but they've got grandfathered commissions as, part of that mix. And so, a lot of them are in some pretty scared states at the moment because you remove that and all of a sudden their business isn't producing a profit at all.
Yeah.
And there was an interesting push by a lot of the bank's licensees here to sell, trail books of revenue, and they're selling them at pretty high multiples over the last 5 years. And that was a way to bring in advisors, etc. And so one of the scary things for these guys is that, they were going about, well, this is a great place to start. I'll take it on board. I'll use that to grow my business, and I'll move on to a fee-based model and transition the business. And of course, they're in a position where they may be losing chunks of that revenue. And some product providers have elected to turn it off anyway. So, it could just be luck of the draw. So we're going through this mix at the moment. And out of all of that, I think the really exciting thing is that advice needs to be better. It always did. That's what I believe. I've been passionate about it for a very, very long period of time. And so it's kind of a catalyst for bringing about this change. And I think that will absolutely result in more profitable businesses charging appropriately, but also then delivering appropriately. I think the commission idea actually affected fee firms in a way that I believe has led to them being unprofitable. So, I'm seeing a lot of fee-based businesses that are only marginally viable. And it's because there's this philosophy of trying to charge as little as possible instead of let's go as deep as possible with the client and understand the value and charge for it. And so I think we're going to have a much better advice ecosystem. But I'm also interested in your comments that, 40-odd thousand advisors became, didn't quite halve, but close.
Yeah.
We're also seeing that happening in Australia. And I think over the next 3 or 4 years, that's exactly what we'll see, a very high drop-off. So most of the banks have gone pretty hardcore about removing their licensing of advisors. Some of them have shut down their advice divisions. And so there are a lot of advisors out there at the moment, looking around and looking for work. And a lot of them that were running their own businesses but licensed through a bank are now looking for a new home in order to be able to operate their advice firm. So that just shares a little bit of background. I think
it's very similar.
This is happening. Yeah, no, this is very similar. I mean, I remember going back to 1988 in the UK when I first started. We just had our first regulations then. So it was the Financial Services Act, and there were numbers are difficult to find, but reputedly we had somewhere between 250 and 300,000 regulated individuals. So I don't think RDR itself in the UK has necessarily contributed to that reduction in numbers. It's happened over a very long time, but I think this has been a constant move towards a more professional environment. And if I think about some of the things that were going on in 1988, it was horrendous, really. And I come to South Africa. I don't want to slate the South Africans, but I can see a lot of stuff going on here that in the UK was going on 20 years ago. So I think we're all on the same journey. So tell me about Beyond RDR. What's the objective here, and what do you help firms do through this process?
Okay, so Beyond RDR is a coaching and consulting business. What we do is help advisors create and deliver an experience that their clients willingly pay for, and that's fundamentally what we do. Now, the conversation in advisor world always turns to fees, right? Whenever I speak at an event or whenever I have conversations with advisors, kind of the first thing that pops up is, how do I get paid? In this environment, I think that's where the pain is for the advisors. But what a lot of them, I think, have really not thought through is the other side of the equation. And the other side of the equation is, what is the value that we need to deliver as advisors to actually get clients to willingly pay us? Because that's the space we're moving into. You talked about opt-outs there, Baz. If your clients or opt-ins, if your clients got to opt in to making a payment every year, then, well, there must be something on the other side of that equation, right? And what's on the other side of that equation is the value that advisors deliver. And when I talk about in my LinkedIn profile, you'll see transforming the financial conversation. For me, we're having the wrong conversations with people. That's the problem. We're having the wrong conversations with people because we've been trained by the industry to have this product conversation. And even good financial planners aren't getting, a lot of good financial planners in South Africa are getting paid nothing for financial planning. They're only getting paid for the distribution of a product or the gathering of assets. And we seem to be stuck in that space. So the mission really is to get a lot closer to the clients, to understand what it is that we're actually solving in terms of a problem, because clients come to us because they have a problem, and solving those problems. And often it doesn't require a product to solve problems. In fact, I think financial planning is really all about how we think, how we talk, and how we behave around money. So we need to get into that space.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I might just share with everyone the reason that we actually connected was because you saw a LinkedIn post that someone had engaged with that you picked up, and you made some comments on there, and we got chatting through the thread, and then I looked at your profile, and I'm like, this seems like me from a mirror dimension. It was quite interesting.
And then we started finishing each other's lines.
Yeah, I've picked that up quite a few times. Hopefully,
but it's amazing when you get a like-minded group of people all thinking the same way. You can change all sorts of things. I've noticed that in the UK, there's a community of financial planners in the UK that I'm connected to that are, they're winning big time. They're just having such great fun at the moment, and they're delivering an amazing result. There's a small community here in South Africa. I'm sure you've got the same kind of community in Australia, and we need to increase the size of those communities.
Yeah, I totally.
And that's what we're trying.
I mean, that's been a big objective on my part, to open up the conversation and make it what I call non-aligned. So in Australia, the most of the financial advisors were either bank employed or then licensed through a bank or institutional licensee. So they might have run their own advice firm, but the license came from one of these guys, right? And so the information they're getting has largely been controlled by the licensee, the product providers, associations, which have and I'm not dissing any of these parties. I'm just saying they all have a bias and a particular focus that they're working on. So the associations like the Financial Planning Association, etc., have political agendas. They have a membership list. They're trying to be intermediaries between these parties. And then you've got the publications like the magazines, etc., who have an income that comes from sponsorship that operates within the ecosystem. Now, like I said, this is not me discrediting any of those things, but I think ultimately for advice to go forward, there needs to be more conversation about this. And that's why we're here today, to talk about these things, to talk about what we've found, to open it up, because in my opinion, and I said this the other day, advisors are sleeping giants. They have the ability to transform their clients' lives, not to give them, XYZ dollars in retirement or protect themselves from, sickness or injury or whatever. Yes, that's part of the equation, but it's not the transformative bit. And I think it's really interesting because one of the other things, I might just going to open this one up now, is that you've also started another business, which is called the Financial Caddy.
Yeah.
And I think the name kind of gives an indication for this, but it's a non-regulated advice and coaching business. And, I sit down with firms all of the time. Yeah. In fact, we're just going through a strategic benchmarking and review for a reasonable size, but still small firm doing about $4 million of turnover. And I'm looking at their profit and saying, well, yeah, sure, you're reasonably profitable, but not really. And here's the reason why. On a fund basis, you've built an awesome business, but you're not looking at the whole picture of the client. You've got this complex client. Sure, they've got $4 million portfolio or whatever, and you're charging them for financial advice and investment structuring and tax planning. But what about these other aspects of their lives? What about their behavior and their relationships with their kids and all of these things that actually make up the real impact to them? And I think evolving the conversation, advisors are in the perfect position to be able to go there. And then I think the thing that's truly fascinating is that you get the guys that have been doing commission and them saying, well, how do we switch to, charging fees? And then I meet advice firms that are charging fees and I'm looking at it going, how are you even surviving trying to do that level of work for this fee income? And it's really simple. When you know your value and you understand that it's not about this action list or a tangible outcome like investment performance, and you understand that the only relevance is in the client's life and how are you translating the impact to that. And if you do, they will pay you and they will happily pay you and they will do it almost every time and significantly more than under the old model. So and I've got one last thing to say, and then I'm gonna sorry, mate, I'm gonna throw open.
No, it's all right.
To you then, because I've kind of been saying there's two ways you can go about doing this. You can be a traditional firm that does investment planning and structuring, etc., and then you can become what I call a deep value advisor, which is all about the client's life situation and circumstance, and you can add that onto that framework, or you can decide you don't want to have anything to do with that framework because that's not really where the true leverage is. And you can create a business that is all advice and completely unregulated. And I think this is an interesting dichotomy. And that's definitely the two pathways that, we've been a part of helping firms to go down and that we're seeing happen in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me tell you how that happened, because so as you said earlier, I got to South Africa 7 years ago. It was a family move that brought me here. And I was looking at the financial advisory space and I was trying to decide whether I should set up my own, over here it's called an FSP, a financial planning firm, or whether I should go into a consulting and coaching role. I can see the direction of travel. So I started talking to advisors and they all said to me, Brian, you don't understand. I'm sure everybody in the UK willingly pays fees, but nobody in South Africa is going to pay a fee for advice. It's just never going to happen. You've probably heard that a few times, right? Okay, so I was like, okay, well, but I know that this isn't true. So in the UK, just before I left, I'd been tinkering with this idea of the financial caddy, which comes from my previous background as a golf professional many years ago. And it was basically an experiment. I thought, well, if people are telling me that clients won't pay fees, but I don't believe that, maybe I should just put myself out there and see what happens. So I created the Financial Caddy, and frankly, I'm not interested in having the product conversation. I'm not interested in gathering assets. I'm not interested in spending my time talking to people about investment funds or investment performance. It's dull and it's boring, and most people don't really want to do that. So it was an experiment, and I got some referrals. Some people referred to me, and I started going through the process that I would normally go through previously. And the conversation was really all about trying to identify what is the problem that this couple or this individual have. And, most clients don't know. Most clients don't really know what the problem is. And it's only when we unpack that through really good questions that we can find out. And so what I discovered was that despite the fact that I wasn't regulated and I wasn't having conversations about products, people were happy to pay because I was solving a problem. So let me give you an example. It was there's a couple in Joburg that I was introduced to. He runs a business. I got in there. I asked him how he needed help. What is it that I can do to help you? And the answer he gave me was, I'm 3 years away from retirement. I've got some money in the bank and I want to know whether to invest it now or wait. And I guess faced with that question, most advisors would dive straight in and say, well, this is an investment question. And the answer is you invest the money now. Why? Because I don't get paid if you don't invest the money now. So I'm not going to tell you to wait, am I?
Can I jump in for a second? Because, it seems so obvious to me that what they're really saying is I've got some hang-ups and there's some other things going on in my life. And so the first thing I'd be saying is, well, why are you asking this question? What's the real issues behind this? What are you afraid of? What are you wanting to do? Where are you going with it?
Exactly. It's the wrong question, but we, the industry, have trained clients to ask those questions. When you were talking about the press earlier, when you open up the press and you see all the adverts about comparisons between Fund A and Fund B, I mean, in the UK, we call that financial pornography. I mean, it's just designed to distract people from what they should really be talking about, right? So we've trained clients to come with those questions, and he doesn't know what else to ask. And so I gave him the only answer that can be given in that scenario. In fact, I said to him, I think you're asking me the question, is the market going to go up or down in the next 3 years? And he was like, yeah, that's kind of the question. And I gave him the answer, the only answer possible, which is I haven't got the faintest idea. I don't know. And so he was like, well, I thought you were a financial advisor. You come highly recommended. And now this is a really crucial moment, I think, in the first meeting. I talk about it a lot. Most financial advisors are not willing to be vulnerable in that space. We're the experts. We have to convince people that we've got all the right answers. So we dive into giving advice to demonstrate our value, because we're not quite sure what our value really is. Okay. So I was willing to be vulnerable in that space. And I said, listen, I think we're having the wrong conversation here. As you identified, let's go back and have a slightly different conversation. And so through the process, I built up a picture of this guy and his family, and it was really interesting. And then I asked him what he did for fun. And he said, I fly. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. Tell me about that. And so he started telling me about he and his wife. They've got a little fixed wing aircraft, a little 2-seater thing, and they fly all over the place, and it's fantastic. And then there was a pause in the conversation. And he said, Brian, I just want to fly my plane until I can't pass the medical anymore. And I was like, there we go. Right. Here's the problem. This is now the problem. And the question is, have I got enough money to fly my plane until I can't pass the medical? That's the question that he's got. He doesn't need to know whether he wants to invest his money now or wait for 3 years, really. There's a different conversation to have. And so I showed him how we would solve that problem. I went through the whole process. I explained what I was all about, and he happily paid a fee. He agreed to the fee in that meeting, and then told me that he got 2 financial plans on his desk already from 2 different financial planners who had done really good work. And I said, how much did you pay for those financial plans? And he said, nothing. They were for free. And I said, well, how come you just agreed to pay me then? And he said, I can tell they just want my money. And so that for me is the kind of the crux. We're stuck in this space. We're having the wrong conversations with people.
It's interesting. I put a video up on LinkedIn. It's also on our YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to check that out, just go to YouTube, The Social Advisor. And the title was, What's an Advisor's Real Role? And even the title advisor gives the wrong psychology for this thing, because it's like you said, advisors think they're advisors. So what's their primary role to do? Give advice. No, that's wrong. If you are a shallow depth advisor, then yeah, okay, possibly you can follow that pathway. But just even thinking that, so we're kind of indoctrinated into this all the way from just having the name advisor, right?
Yeah.
The thing about it is that advisors cannot give someone else advice about their own life. And that's the stuff that actually matters. So an advisor's principal role is to help someone to find their own answers. So it's really about that deep questioning, knowing how to ask the right questions. It's not your answers, it's their answers. Once you get those, you can then frame all of the ideas and strategy and everything else into the context of, this is where you are, this is where you want to be, this is how we're going to help you get there. And I think that was a beautiful example you gave of, I just want to be able to fly until I can't pass the medical. If you haven't gone there, if you haven't dug deep enough, then how are you actually being a real advisor? That's what I call deep value advice. And the thing about it is, once you frame it in those terms, people will pay you, and the money is almost irrelevant, because you know
what happens. You know what happens. What happens is, when you go through that process, you get all the money. They automatically give you all the money. Why wouldn't they give you all the money?
Because it's not the relevant part.
No, but also you've crossed the trust threshold, because your relationship is now genuinely all about the client. And once you get into that position, if they've got investment capital, why are they not going to give it to you? And that's exactly what happened in this case. And now, obviously, I can't take it, so I have to introduce him to a regulated advisor, and that's cool. So, like I say, that was an experiment, but I've had the same result over and over and over again. I've got clients that are paying me decent monthly retainer fees not to talk to them about products. I don't want to talk about products. And this is an interesting thing for me, because I'm also not convinced that every single client wants that kind of relationship with an advisor. Let's call them an advisor, right? Some clients just want to pitch up and have a product, some sort of transactional product conversation. That happens. And so now, as an advisor, you've got to decide whether you're going to be a transactional advisor and accommodate that transaction, or whether you say, I don't do that. That's not who I am. I do this. Now, if you're a brand new advisor and you haven't got any clients yet, there's probably a transition for you to go through. You've got to do some transactional work. You've got to cut your teeth on that stuff, maybe. I'm gonna be a little counterpunch here. Yeah, I want you to, because I've been struggling with this myself.
I don't think anyone really doesn't want that. I think you've got people who are afraid and conflicted internally enough that they won't allow that process to come about. But I think everyone wants to get to the other side of the journey of what's next in their life. And everyone wants someone they can do it with to help them to get there. Because you know what? You cannot be objective in making decisions about how to move forward to get what you want in life, because you are attached to the end outcome, and that's what sabotages the process. This is why advisors' role is the most critical, not to tell them how to do it, but to help them figure out their own answers, because that's an objective way to actually help them get there. So that's my opinion. I think every single person in the world wants that. If you boil it down to it, someone they can trust to stand beside them to get them to actually get to where they want to be. That doesn't mean everyone is prepared to go through that experience. And so that's
Well,
what
that's the concept. Yeah, no, I completely get that, and I agree. And that's the concept of the financial caddy. If you think about how a professional golfer and his caddy or her caddy have a relationship, the caddy is there to walk the journey. The golfer knows how to play the game, but doesn't really understand in the heat of battle exactly all the shots, and they don't have all the information. Most of the time, they can see exactly what they want to do. But it isn't until that relationship has developed that you can get to a point where the caddy is able to say, the tournament's on the line, you have to take this shot on, this is the right shot to play. Or we're at that stage in the tournament where you're in trouble now, you just need to chip out sideways and just forget about all that stuff. That's a metaphor really for me for the nature of the relationship that we should have.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I was really excited to hear about you going down this pathway, because in some ways that lets me off the hook from having my own crack at doing that, right? So I've been saying for years now, when people ask me, well, Baz, if you were setting up a financial advice business from scratch now, how would you do it? And I was asked this question probably about 4 years ago now. And it clicked straight away. You know what? It would not be regulated. I would not have what's called proper authority here in Australia. I just wouldn't do it. So what would I do? I would charge people probably a minimum of $20,000 a year.
Yeah.
And I would help them always be moving forward in their life. Now, part of that would then be project managing as their partner, engaging with a regulated advisor. Okay, all right, well, we need to take care of this part of it. Now that we understand all of these principles, we've made decisions, we know what's most important to you, we know how to balance all of this stuff out. Right, let's go and sit down with someone and get them to do this bit. And
that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens in my relationships with clients.
And you know what? It's actually advisors, it kind of blows me away, because I hear this all the time. People won't pay for that. And then all I do is, and I'm assuming that this is part of what you do with people through the Beyond RDR process, I sit them down and go, this is how to actually dig with your clients. You are already educated. And I get these objections like, I'm not a qualified life coach. Well, no, you are qualified. You've been doing this, for 5, 10, 15, 30, whatever years. You are actually qualified. You just haven't turned the switch on up here. So I'll give you a couple of examples recently. So I met with a relatively young guy. He's a new partner in a firm, and they were licensed with one of those banking institutions, which has since cut all they've said, okay, you've got till September to find a new license. And because they're a bank, they have incredibly overreacted to some of the things that came through the Royal Commission. So we have to have, it's the financial advisors have to produce a statement of advice before they give regulated advice to a client. And in their situation, he's saying, look, I've got all these new clients coming through, but I can't do anything with them. I'm starting to lose them because my plans have got to go through this pre-vetting process like I'm a rookie advisor. And because everyone's doing it, I can't get a statement of advice out to a client in under 3 months.
Wow.
And well, it's pretty simple. I just said to him, well, that's great. And he's like, what do you mean? And I went, well, now you can actually charge for the bit that's more important. And so I just took him through a process of, look, here's how you need to reset the conversation. Tell them you're going to take them through this aspect of figuring out everything in their life. Tell them you're going to charge them $5,000, and you have to do that before you even get to the producing a plan stage. And I met him a week later and he said, okay, well, they all said yes. They all said yes. What this helped me realize is I was giving all of that away for free before.
Yeah, it's the most valuable part, to be honest. And I've got this, idea that historically we've given away advice, planning and coaching for free in order to get paid to do a transaction. and to gather the assets. In the developed world, that's fast going to zero. I mean, I've got a portfolio in the UK. It's 22 basis points all in. It's not complicated. It's not that difficult. That's heading to zero. The future, I think, is where human beings are going to need help with all the other stuff. How do I get the life that I want with the money that I've got available? That's fundamentally the question. So for me, it just flips itself around completely the opposite way. Historically, we've been paid for the bit that we can't control the investment performance. The market delivers what the market delivers. And yet we've attached our value to that. And I think that's a scary prospect going forward. So yeah, I completely agree. I think, I think that's where all the value is, but that's not where we've been trained to have the conversation, and lots of advisors don't know how to do it. I did a workshop this week on my program. The first module is all about the first meeting, and the guys that were in the room were like, "This is fundamentally a different thing. This is like nobody's ever talked to me like this before." So the industry, in my view, the industry just stuck in this space, and I guess it's because people have never experienced it before. And if you've never experienced it before, you're not going to be confident that it works until you try it.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting. I had a meeting last week with a business that we've been working with, and I expect in the first 12 months we'll double their revenue and reduce their number of clients. Like, in fact, I'm being very conservative. It's going to be a lot more than that. Now, this is an existing fee-for-service planning business, right? We'll create huge amounts of efficiency, so he won't have to work 6 days a week. It'll be more like 3.5, and
yeah,
double revenue, triple profit. That's just in the first year, right? And 2 months ago when we started this process, and I'm just kind of sharing this with you, when I was first talking to him, he was really depressed. His business isn't viable. He's stuck in this position. He'd bought a book of business, so a small amount, 20% of the revenue was in this grandfathered space, so that's disappearing. And I'm saying, well, this is what we've got to do. And he's like, clients won't pay that. And I'm like, yes, they will. I've done this a million times. There's an element of trust here. All you've got to do is try. Yeah. And it's interesting. We had our 2-month snapshot review, and he's increased his revenue by $100,000 already just in the last 2 months. But the interesting thing was, what I always say is, when you take your fees and you put it up front and you're doing it with the client selling you what the outcome is, right? As soon as you know what that thing is, I want to fly my plane until I can't pass the medical anymore. Okay, This is how we're going to make sure that happens. And by the way, that won't be the only thing. There'll be deeper stuff about family and all the rest of it. But you have to get them to tell you what that is before you can actually help paint the picture of why your advice is so valuable. And as I said to him, okay, well, there's this client, it's $4,000. You're going to put the fee up to $18,000, and you're going to charge them $15,000 upfront for this extra work that you're doing right now. And this is how you're going to explain it and why. And this is why they've been hanging back from talking to you, because I get them to go through all of this. And you know what? I always say, once you do this, the value experience of the clients is so profound that your referrals go up every time. And the sheepish part was when he said, okay, you're right. And guess what? Called me back that evening and referred on an even better client.
Yeah. You've just used a word, though, that I think is really, really important. And that word is experience. This is experiential. It's really difficult to tell a client what this is. It's really difficult. We use this word financial planning, right? So what do we do? We're going to sell you a financial plan. Clients don't want a financial plan. We're going to take you through a financial planning process. They don't know what that is. It's experiential. You have to actually go through the process and let them experience it for them to suddenly go, actually, this is fundamentally different to all the other conversations I've ever had. And I really like this conversation. I like the way this is going because you're talking about me and the things that are important to me. And all of a sudden the light bulb goes on for the client. And I think that's the reason why a lot of them, most of them, are willing to say yes.
Absolutely.
There's got to be, so I talk about, there's got to be a connection between two dots, the value dot. What difference is this going to make to my life? And the price dot. And if we can't connect those two dots, the client can't make the leap. Financial advisors aren't used to talking about their price because we've never had to. So we're struggling with that part of the conversation. And we've never had to articulate our value either. So we're struggling with that part of the conversation. But when you can bring those two things together, amazing things happen.
Absolutely. Not only that, the conversation is better, it's deeper, it's more transformative, it feels nicer. And that's the universal experience or the feedback that I've had from advisors going through this change is
I've got my energy back.
Yeah.
I've got my mojo back.
Yeah, that's it. You know, in fact, I have a slogan for when people say, oh, what do you do? Well, probably there's two ways I can say it. We take firms from less than 30% EBIT to above 50% EBIT and then help them scale, or we just help the owners of advice business get their mojo back.
There you go. I mean, and I think, you know, in South Africa at the moment, we've got a lot of advisors that have lost their mojo. The market's been rough for the last few years. And when the market's rough and you've sold your value proposition on the basis of performance, guess what? You're going to have difficult conversations with your clients. And they're stuck in that loop of investment performance feedback and fund selections. And there's no value there. There's no value, and it's not a great conversation, and they've all lost their mojo. So, I think it's, you know, I think you have to be willing to go to that place. You have to want to go to that place. But why wouldn't you? I think the financial planner that has got the closest relationship with the client out of all the people in the value chain, that's where all the control and the power really lies, even though at the moment, financial planners don't have the confidence to see that. They see that all the power lies in the industry. But it really doesn't. It really doesn't.
That's that sleeping giant thing that I was talking about before.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, when we wake up to the idea that if we're having the right conversations with our clients and we talk about relationships, we talk about developing really good relationships. I'm sorry, but the client's not going anywhere else. There's nobody else that can do this. Accountants typically can't do it or can't see that they can do it, although I think there's a great opportunity for them.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Lawyers can't do it.
It's interesting you say that because we work with all advice and services firms. For us, it's about, is advice in your DNA? But park that, because most typically that's financial advice and accounting firms, right?
Yeah.
And we were talking about this just before we started recording, and that is that there's just as much opportunity for this in the accounting profession as there is in the financial advice profession. Because
I agree.
And we've had exactly the same experience in helping accountants go through this process of, no, you've got your own value perception wrong. In fact, I'm going to say this, I think accountants are even worse at articulating their deeper value to clients than financial advisors are. And that's because I think financial advisors have been taken.
I think that's true. I have the same conversation with my accountant here in South Africa. He wants to charge me an hourly rate for doing compliance work. I'm going to do your payroll. I'm going to do your tax return. I'm like, hold on a second. That's just hygiene stuff. I'll pay you a lot more if you can help me reduce the tax on my business, so that I can get this. This is what I want. This is what I want my business life to look like. I can't get him to get past that concept of I'm an accountant. I create audited financial statements and do tax compliance. I spent 12 years co-creating a financial planning business inside an accountancy practice in Oxford in the UK. And it was fascinating because we were working for the same entity, but there was a clear division between the tax side and the financial planning side. I'm sure they hated us most of the time. We were jumping up and down on the phone and we were quite excitable, guys, and these people were very studious and very accurate and very precision.
I've heard this story at least a couple of hundred times before, funnily enough.
It was amazing. And we picked up our department and we took it and we put it right in the middle of the tax department to try and get some synergy. And yes, it was difficult. Hey, I mean, but what an opportunity to get that mindset of the financial planner and the accounting practice that's already got the clients. They're already paying fees. They're already professionals.
It's interesting.
They kind of expect to pay.
Where we've seen, just even in that sense, this kind of difficult integration between what is essentially the two most aligned professions that that I can think of, right?
Yeah.
And look, I've come across some great firms that have really done it well, but most kind of struggle with it. As soon as you help both advisors move beyond the scope into deep value advice, and that is, no, you just have a particular denomination. So that's the way I look at it. We've got the same religion. The religion is we help people to find their own answers and have a better life. That's our focus. This is how we question them. This is where we dig, and our role is to open that up. And once you can get them onto that same pathway, and they've done it with clients, and clients are paying for it, there's a cascade evolution that we've seen take place, and they're now exactly on the same page. And I think that's an interesting expression of some of the challenges that we're kind of talking about here as well. But I think
a lot of that is mindset. I think it's just changing the mindset of how we think about what it is that we're doing. I think, most of us have just got the blinkers on because that's the way that we've always done it. And when we challenge that, if we're willing to challenge that, then I think we can see the world in a completely different way.
Look, I totally agree. So maybe let's dig into some other things that people listening and tuning in can get some value from. So what would be your, and I'm just throwing this out there, what would be your number one tip for kind of embarking on the start of this journey? Like, how do you go from people tuning into this going, well, this is kind of making sense, but now my fears are getting in the way, and how do I apply this in what I'm doing, and what would be your best tip? And then I'll see if I can come up with them as one as well. So I'm making you answer.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. So, well, let's start with a challenge. The challenge is that people have got to be willing to look. People have got to be willing to go on the journey. And I don't think lots of advisors are willing to go on the journey until they start to see a problem. There needs to be some urgency. So what is the urgency? Typically, the two things that I find advisors saying they're struggling with the most, one is I'm struggling to find the right clients. And the second one is I'm doing lots of good work that I'm not getting paid for. Those are the two most common problems. So if you find yourself in that position, I would say you've got to go right back to the beginning and say, what is it that you're actually doing for your client? Because you've got to understand the problem that you're solving before you can define who the right clients are for you. Because if you're saying I'm struggling to find the right clients, that must mean that you're working with some wrong clients. So even if you don't know exactly what the right clients are, define who you don't want to work with.
I think there's an interesting thing in there, because if they've also said to you, and I'm doing lots of great work that I'm not getting paid for, that kind of says to me that maybe you do have the right clients, but you're not actually charging them for what you're doing and articulating the value. So it could very well be a case of they're right there in front of you the whole time.
Yeah.
And you're thinking you're just not finding the right people.
Yeah.
And we certainly see that across lots of the businesses that we've talked to. You know what? You think you've got to find better clients because what you've been delivering to the ones you've got isn't appropriate, and you're not charging enough for it.
So there were some guys that were in this workshop last week, and I asked the question, "How many clients do you have?" And they were all, I mean, the average would be about 300. And some of these guys are making no recurring revenue at all. And I'm like, okay, so I'm willing to bet that if we did nothing else but created a proposition, something that you could believe in, that you can take forward, and we went to your existing clients and somehow we did a confidence transplant, right? And you just sat down and pitched this thing to people, I'm willing to bet that a decent proportion of those people will just say yes straight off the bat. So how do we get them there? How do we get them to that position where they feel confident enough to approach their existing clients who are not generating any recurring revenue? And I think they've got to be willing to go there. And then somehow we've got to give them, well, I think they've got to build a value proposition that's worth talking about, but that doesn't have to be super complex. For me, it's about having that conversation with people.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. You know, I'm just going to add to what you said before. Almost universally, when we've had a business sit down with us and go, hey, this is the position we're in, and we look at it and go, you know what? This is what you want to do. This is how you want to help people. Let's figure this out. Now let's go to the existing client base. And almost universally, that can transform the profitability of the business instantly. Well, when I say instantly, in the scheme of operating a business, it's pretty close to instant. You know, like the example I gave before, we're not going to take on new clients for doubling this guy's revenue. And he's going to go from zero profitability because, okay, he's making $150,000 profit, right? No, that's just your salary. And if you're not making an excess return over and above what you have to pay yourself, that means zero profit.
Yeah.
And adding, I would say, 800,000 of profit within 12 months without adding new resources or staff and probably seeing less clients. And they were right there in front of him. This isn't about scalping clients either. This is not that at all. This is people going, you know what? Oh, I'm so grateful to give you this money because you're actually helping me with the thing that I really want in life. And more importantly, you actually helped me figure out what that was. And I didn't know that until you actually took me on this journey. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. If you've got 300 clients, then you've probably got the answer right in front of you. It's not always the case, but almost universally. Yeah.
I see that all the time. And, you know, you and I both know this story has been told so many times. One of my clients at the moment is having exactly that experience. You know, we worked together for 6 months. He went through a couple of epiphanies, and then one of the things that we often say is you need to trial this with brand new clients first, because you've got nothing to lose. I know lots of advisors are worried about their existing clients and upsetting I don't want to upset my existing clients. Okay, well, let's try this out on some new people first. You don't have anything to lose.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're obviously a little softer than me.
Probably. Maybe I should harden up.
What happens? Sorry, let me just add in there because I didn't want that one to get quite out of context. Look, universally, I find that is the resistance point. Advisors are afraid of having the conversation with their existing clients. And over time, I've gone from, all right, well, let's do it with the newer clients, to really focusing on getting them to have one conversation with an existing client. I find that is 10 times more transformative than the new client. Because doing it with a new client, you haven't had to confront your own biases, fears, hang-ups, etc. So that's kind of just been part of
Yeah.
was been a natural evolution. So that's my tip for
Okay, cool.
this. Get one client, pick one client, and go through this process of deep questioning, finding out where they're at. This is where you are today. This is where you want to be tomorrow. And this is what we're going to charge to get you there. And even if you're not getting help, by the way, I think you probably should get help. There's a reason why, Brian and I are doing these things, because it's very hard to be objective about your own business. Just like clients need you as an advisor, advisors need someone to help them realize where they're not being objective about their business. So that's the most radical transformation. But even if you're just doing it on your own, pick one client. And the next question I get is, well, what do I charge?
And the answer to that for me is, it doesn't matter. Just pick a number. Pick a number that you feel comfortable with, that you can say out loud, right? It doesn't matter what the number is. It can be a low number, because that's not where you're going to end up.
I love this conversation, Brian. It's funny.
Just start. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think there's a really, really important point here, and advisors get hung up on it. I mean, we've got a 26-point checklist for helping advisors build their fee model. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to this. Pick a number and charge it, because you can use any calculator you want, but at the end of the day, it's still up to you to go, this is what I'm worth to you in this situation, and here's what I'm charging. And so you've got to start somewhere. And the real challenge isn't knowing the right number. It's you going, you know what, I'm going to embrace this and pick a number that's scary to you. That would be what I would say to you. Whatever it is.
Something that's going to stretch you beyond where you are at the moment, but it doesn't really matter, because it's not where you'll end up.
Exactly.
And are you familiar with Dan Sullivan? Do you know Dan Sullivan, strategic coach?
Yes. In fact, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but I always give attribution whenever I use anyone else's work. The only person that I give attribution to, in fact, for two things, is Dan Sullivan. So much credit to him.
Yeah, no, he's amazing. And so there's something that he says. The first thing, there are 4 steps. The first one is to commit. Just make a commitment to do it. The second thing is have courage, because it's going to get shitty. Those are the words he uses. Okay, it's going to be difficult. You're going to have to do things that you haven't done before. So just have a bit of courage and just be brave. Then you'll build capability. You'll suddenly learn how to do something new, and then you'll have confidence. The confidence comes at the end. So you just have to go through that process. And that's what I try and tell all the guys that I work with. Just make a commitment. So on the fee side, pick a number. Look, you have to have something valuable to go along with that. And I think one of the things that a lot of advisors are looking for is the sort of silver bullet question. To tell me what question to ask people. There isn't one. There's no silver bullet. You've got to ask lots of open-ended questions and whys until you get to the real issues. And you've got to let people sit with the question. So one of the things I find as a financial planner myself, I found this really one of the hardest things to do. To ask a question and then shut up long enough to let the client process the question that I've just asked and think about what that means, and then start to articulate an answer. And we just want to fill that space all the time, particularly in the first meeting. We're trying to justify our value. We want to give advice. I found that really, really, really hard. And the more I ask a great question and just let it go, the more information I get, and the deeper the client goes into that question and starts to think about what the issues are. So I agree with everything you've said there. I'm going to share the one thing that I usually quote Dan Sullivan for, and I think it's quite relevant, because it's, well, how do I start asking questions?
And Dan Sullivan calls it the R factor question. And it goes something like this. Imagine that we're sitting together in 3 years' time and you're looking back over the past 3 years. What are the things that you would like to see happen both personally and financially in order to feel like it's been a great 3 years?
And that's the Dan Sullivan question. That's a brilliant question.
And that's the one that I've been using now for probably about 15 years. And it's really interesting because whenever I sit down with an advisor, I ask the same question. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to have a chat to Baz, well, I'm going to ask you that, but don't prepare ahead of time, because that's the beauty in this. When you're in the conversation flow, it's a great start point. And there's a couple of key elements to that. One is you're asking them to psychologically commit to the possibility of working with you for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So that changes the mindset that they have as they're with you. Secondly, it removes all of the noise that they're experiencing today. They're coming in, should I invest now or not? And you've totally flipped that around on its head. So the answers you get typically aren't, well, I want to get my retirement savings to here, or I want this or whatever. They'll start talking about freedom in their family and careers and fulfillment. And that's when you start digging deeper. And the true mastery of an advisor is to look deeper into the questions, look for what's not being said or what they really mean by something, and just keep digging and asking. And I think the ultimate objective whenever you have any form of advice meeting with someone is that they come out of that going, wow, I know something more about myself. If you've done that, then that's one of the key signs that you're creating transformative advice with your clients. And that's my number one objective. Whenever I'm with someone, I want to help them see something about themselves they didn't know. I can't give that to them. Only they can give it to themselves. But how do you do it? Through the asking of questions. And I think that's really important. Once you've got these deeper answers, you can paint any picture of any value proposition and have someone go, yeah, I'm going to pay you for that because now I know exactly what it means to me and what it's worth, and I'm connected to it. By the way, the only thing I do differently now is instead of saying personally and financially, I would say personally and professionally, because I'm talking to people about their profession or their business. And I think that's a really powerful question. It is a powerful question process, but it's a great place to start.
Yeah. The other thing I always ask clients in the first meeting too is, where can I add value? Where do you think I can? So, I would normally ask that question toward the end, once I've understood what's going on. So where do you think I can add value? So when I asked that question about the client in Joburg, he was like, well, I need to know whether I've got enough money to be able to fly my plane.
I think it's really important what you said. Don't ask that question at the start of the meeting. Ask it at the end. Yeah. Because otherwise, people are coming in with this fixated, well, I'm seeing a financial advisor, an accountant or whatever, so I've got to be focused on this. And your goal really is to take all of that away and go, yeah, okay, just park that. Who are you? Yeah. Where are you at? Where are you going? Yeah. What is it that's really important to you? Okay.
And I find that clients want to have those conversations because it's about them. People like talking about themselves. They want to have those conversations.
I'll give you an example for a recent conversation with an advisor. And so, we typically, when we're working with someone directly, so we have a range of programs. And this is more like the we're in your business partnering you. We literally go through every single client. So just not promoting, I'm just trying to give context for where we find this stuff. And so we're having this conversation about, a lady, she's in her 60s. She's got a daughter who's, in her mid-20s and going to university, etc. Has a, $4 or $5 million property portfolio. A husband passed away 10 years ago. and she's poor, right? She's got no money, and she's, you know, paying a tiny amount of fees. And the challenge is, well, I'm trying to advise you, but I can't because you've got no money and you won't take advice. And so, you know, he's got this, there's maybe a couple $100,000 that was in an investment account. And I just said, well, why aren't you going deeper? What's the real issue here? And so we're talking through, and I'm asking questions, and I'm saying, well, it's pretty simple to me. Her husband's passed away. They built this property portfolio together. She's holding on to this, and she's living at home. She's not going out. She's kind of closeted herself away. Her daughter's worried about her. I said, here's how you're going to, I won't go into exactly how I said, here's how you're going to tackle the conversation. Anyway, we met a week later, and he said, wow, it just completely blew the conversation out of the water. And the daughter's like, you're going to help me save my mum. You're the best person ever. Right. And she's in tears and like admitting that she's been hiding herself away and that she's holding on to these properties because she doesn't want to let her husband go. Is that really what he would want for her? No. And I mean, she can afford to go on holidays with the daughter and do all kinds of things, and she doesn't have to live this way. And now she's actually made a decision to change everything, but not the outcome of sell the property and invest it. The main outcome is, what are you holding on to in your life?
I get that. And I've had lots of experiences like that. And I think lots of advisors are scared to go there. I think lots of advisors are really worried about, you know, what happens if this client suddenly bursts into tears because I've asked them a deep question and now all of a sudden I've opened up a whole bunch of stuff that I can't cope with. And that's a tricky one. You know, we're not counselors, most of us. We're not psychologists. But at the same time, the stuff we talk about is so deep. We can't avoid that conversation.
This is what I'm going to say to advisors, right? Because, and I kind of touched on it before, because I get that all the time. Oh, I'm not a counselor. I'm not a psychologist. You know what? You know what you are? Someone who can ask questions, be not emotionally connected, and sit back and look at variables. If you're an accountant or a financial advisor, you are 100% trained in those things. And that's what people actually need. All you have to do is flick the switch in your head, remove yourself from the equation. I mean, one of the things could be getting them in to see a psychologist. That's one of
Absolutely.
But you're the objective person to look at this and go, what's going on here? Why are you doing this? What do you want out of your life? Why are you living in this scenario? What are you holding on to? Can I ask you these questions? And you know what? This is what I always say. Everyone has their own answers, and the answer will be in the questions that people ask you or the things that they tell you. And all you have to do is be objective and be analytical and ask questions. And the client will come to their own answers. And you're all trained to do this. Okay, you don't need to, and that's the amazing thing that I see. People have got this massive roadblock, and yet when we take them through the process we follow of rethinking this, reframing their own biases, they go and try it once, and immediately it works, and they've changed someone's life, and they're paying them dollars, and it happens pretty much every single time.
Yeah, and I think if I think back to my journey in terms of when I started to do that, initially I was asking questions. I was asking the questions because I thought those are the questions that I should ask. It was almost like I wanted a script, but it's got to be authentic, and it's got to be the kind of the right question for the right time. In the right environment, and I think that takes a little bit of practice.
I think
kind of take yourself out of. It's like you're asking you're asking questions consciously, so you're thinking about the question rather than actually asking the question. And there comes a point then when you do it unconsciously, it just happens. It's like anything that you practice. And that just comes out, I think that comes out of curiosity, just being curious about people and really just wanting to understand, like you say, who are you and where are you going and where did you come from and
I call
why
it
are you going in that direction?
consciously framing intent. So as an advisor, you have to reprogram yourself, right? So you can pretty much do anything in life if you just reprogram yourself to believe you can and get past your biases. Well, in this case, it's deep advice. So when you're going into this situation, this is why I say, have the program in your head. Your role is to help the client find their own answers and have a better life. So go into the meeting, and it's a bit like, and I use this analogy, you'll like it, even though I've hardly ever played golf, so forgive me. But it's a bit like going and having golfing lessons, because there was a point in time where I went, you know what, I better learn how to do this thing, so I'll get a couple of golf lessons. And, hold here, do the grip this, swing this way, move your feet this way. And like they go through all of that. And then you go up and it's like, okay, now forget all of that and just swing.
Yeah.
Right? And it's a bit the same when you're going into the meeting with a client. Forget all of the other stuff, right? Just let it sit in the background of your mind as part of your process, but control your intent. And your intent is to help that person find their own answers and have a better life. That's what you're there for. And when you go in with that program, it completely changes your own reference. And the second tip that I would give, I was asked this before jumping up on stage to do a keynote once. Someone said, hey, look, I'm going to put out a tweet. I've been following you for a while, so it can be in one tweet. And this is when it was 140 characters before they extended it. What can I say is your number one tip for being successful? And I don't know, it just came to me. You're only truly free to be of service to others when you stop worrying about yourself. So when you go into a meeting, forget everything else. Forget what you're there to do. Forget whether you're signing up a client. Forget how much the cost is going to be or whatever. Just go into that, looking at it, how can I be of the greatest value? And understand that finding their own answers and having a better life, they can't get that without appropriate help. And you can't deliver it without charging people for that.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. I completely agree with that. That's absolutely right.
Well, it's been a very interesting conversation. I want to thank you very much, Brian, for your time. But before we kind of wrap it up, is there any other things that you think would be of interest for what we've spoken about today? So as a quick wrap up, we've talked about legislative change, and really most importantly, shifting advice away from, this box into what is outside the box.
Yeah. So, I'm sure regulatory change is on the minds of lots of advisors in Australia. Certainly here in South Africa, it's like top of mind. Everyone's panicking about the regulatory change. What I would say is financial planners and financial advisors don't have a regulation problem. We've got a business model problem. This has got nothing to do with the regulation. Ignore the regulation. Not ignore the regulation, but don't get bogged down by the regulation, okay? It is what it is. We've got a business model problem, and we need to change the business model. We need to change the conversation that we're having with clients, and we need to change the way that we get paid to do the work that we do. And we've got to have the confidence ultimately to be able to take our remuneration, the control of our remuneration upon ourselves. We don't need the industry. The industry are going to make life difficult for us. We don't want to rely on the industry for our remuneration. So the closer you can get to the client, whoever's closest to the client has got the real relationship and has all the power. So it's not a regulation problem. It's a business model problem. Get closer to the client, have the right conversations, and take control of your remuneration structure. If you find the right clients, you may already have the right clients. You're halfway there.
I think that was beautiful, and I don't think I can add anything to improve that. So I'm going to shut up and not try. Brian, I totally agree with you. It's a business model problem, and don't be thinking that you'll fix it through legislation, and don't be thinking you'll fix it through if I could just get more clients, because that's the other thing that I hear all the time. Can you please just help us get more clients? I mean, that's one of the things that we're known for, social media and building brand. And we built an algorithm which predicts an advisor's referability. I'm obsessed by all of those things because I call myself an advice nerd. But you know what? None of that's relevant until you've actually looked at your business model. You can't go and find more clients to plug into a broken model. That doesn't work. That's
No.
not fixing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thanks, Baz. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Look, thanks very much, Brian. It's been an absolute pleasure. For those of you tuning in, if you're watching on YouTube, please make sure you subscribe and put comments in. Let us know what you think. I would love to know your experiences, especially if you're an advisor from other places in the world that we haven't talked about. We'd love to know what's happening for you. And if you need some help, feel free to reach out to either of us on LinkedIn or through social media. And otherwise, we'll look forward to tuning in again. And Brian, I'm definitely going to have you back on. So looking forward to it.
Great. I look forward to it.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks. Cheers. See you soon.